Now that we've been introduced to the basics of a line, let's talk about now finding the x and y intercepts of a line. The x-intercept, and this applies to any function, not just a line, but this applies to any function. The x-intercept is the value of x when y is equal to 0. So that means if I were to find the x-intercept and I write it as an ordered pair, I'm going to have some number, I'll just write it down as n, and for some number, whatever the x-intercept is, and 0 for y. And that is because if I look at the graph, if I graph a line, the place that it crosses the x-axis, my value of y is always 0. Even if I cross over here, if I change my line, no matter where I cross on the x-axis, my value of y is 0. Okay, now similarly for the y-intercept, the y-intercept is the value of y when x is 0. So the same idea, okay, you're going to get 0 for x, and then you're going to have some number here for y, whatever the y-intercept is, wherever it crosses the x or the y-axis. So if you look at a graph, any graph, and I cross the y-axis, my value of x is going to be 0 there. And if I change the graph and I cross here instead, my value of x is still going to be 0. So when I'm looking for the x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for y and solve for x. And when I'm looking for the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x and solve for y. Okay, so in example 1 of finding x and y intercepts, we're going to find the x and y intercepts of negative 7x plus 4y is equal to 84. Now, I recognize that right away as being a linear function because my degree for x, my coefficient for x is 1, and I can rearrange that equation very easily to put it in this form of mx plus b. So I know that this is definitely linear. Just a quick practice and follow-up of what we did before. Okay, now let's find the x and y intercepts. Let's do the x-intercept first. So the x-intercept is when y is equal to 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 for y and solve for x. This disappears because it's 0, and I'm left with negative 7x is equal to 84. So if I divide both sides by negative 7, I get x is negative 12. So this is my x-intercept, and if I want to write it as an ordered pair, I would write it as negative 12, 0. Now for the y-intercept, that means I'm plugging in x is 0, and I'm solving for y. Okay, so this disappears because that's 0, and I'm left with 4y is equal to 84. If I divide both sides by 4, I get y is equal to 21. If I write that as an ordered pair, that would be 0, 21. That would be my y-intercept as an ordered pair. Okay, next example. Whoops. Let's see. We have y equals 3x plus 5. This actually, because it's in mx plus b form, actually gives us one of the intercepts without having to do any work. If you recall, my value of b is the y coordinate for the y-intercept. So I already know just by looking at that, because it's an mx plus b form, that my y-intercept is 0, -5 without doing any work. And that's one of the advantages to having it in slope-intercept form, is you can see right away where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, now if we go ahead and find the x-intercept. Remember, the x-intercept is the value of x when y is 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 for y and solve for x. When I solve that for x, I'm going to add 5 and divide by 3. So my x-intercept is going to be 5/3. If I write that as an ordered pair, that's going to be 5/3, 0. So those are my two intercepts. Okay, last example for finding x and y intercepts. This one is also a nice easy one, and it's already half done for us. Remember, when it's in this form, b is going to tell me what my y-intercept is. Now, a lot of students make the mistake and say, well, I don't see any b there. That must mean there's no y-intercept. But that's the trick to it. That's not true. Even though we don't write it in there, we actually have -4x plus 0. Even though it's not written in there, it's there. Okay? So my y-intercept is actually 0, 0. So be careful of that. Just because you don't see a plus b, some number in there, doesn't mean there's no y-intercept. It just means that it's 0 and we just didn't bother to write it in there. We were being lazy. Okay, now let's find the x-intercept. The x-intercept is the value of x when y is 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 for y and solve for x. When I divide both sides by -4, I get 0. So my x-intercept is 0, 0 as well. So this is a special case. When I draw my line, it's going to look like this. It's going to cross at the origin, which means it's crossing the x and the y-axis in the same place at 0, 0. So the special case where both the x and the y-intercept is the same ordered pair.